We're here with Dale Cole, a longtime Chrysler employee. Dale, can you tell us how many years you worked there and a little bit about your experience at Chrysler?
Well, I've a combination of 3 plants. I've been with Chrysler for 45 years. I started out down here in 1952, November, and I went worked there for 3 weeks and got laid off. Got called back, got transferred about into the East End, and worked there for about 2.5 years. I got laid off again. I was off about a year, got called to the Indianapolis plant, and I worked there for about 2 years. And I got laid off there, and I went to Kokomo. I got hard into Kokomo, worked there for 57 days, and I got drafted. I went in the Army,
My goodness.
and then I came back, and I was still on layoff status at Indianapolis. I went back to Kokomo, finished out my probationary period. Then I had 2 years plus 90 days at Kokomo, and I worked there for a while. Finally got called back to Indianapolis, and I went back to Indianapolis. I worked there until this had rumors about closing the plant, which they finally did, and I had the opportunity to come back to Newcastle, and kind of history repeating itself. But I started there, and that's where I retired from, was here in Newcastle.
Wow.
So I came back and worked about 10 more years down here before I retired. So it's kind of roll, but it's been a good place to work, and I really enjoyed it.
Now, we've seen through the years that Chrysler has multiple generations of families that have worked there. Did you have any relatives
Yeah.
that worked at Chrysler? Tell us about that.
My dad worked there and retired. I had uncles, I had cousins that worked there, and as you know, Chrysler just kind of a family thing, you know. At one time, it seemed like everybody and their brother worked at Chrysler. That was Newcastle was Chrysler at one time, as far as I'm concerned, you know. Many times people would say that they didn't need Chrysler, but this day and time, I think most of us wish Chrysler was here.
It's always kind of funny too, because over the years, people don't refer to it as Chrysler, they say the Chrysler.
Yeah.
How often have you heard that? They call it the Chrysler.
Yeah, right, very often.
Dale, you mentioned Kokomo. Can you categorize or tell us about the differences between Kokomo and here? Were there a lot of differences?
I mean, yeah, there's quite a bit of differences. I mean, of course, they built transmissions in Kokomo, and machinery-wise, probably similar. But when I was out in the Ford shop, it definitely a big difference there, because you're dealing with a lot of difference in parts. But in Kokomo, it's just more or less a machinery type of, what you're doing, you know. But
Was there a difference in the atmosphere of the plants?
oh yeah, quite a bit. Of course, a newer plant, of course, but higher ceilings. But yeah, there's quite a bit of difference in all 3 of the plants, really. But people, you get out of what you want to put in it, If you want to be a brother, you can be a brother, but overall, all 3 of them, all 3 plants was very good in that respect,
So the Chrysler, the family atmosphere that we've sensed has been at Newcastle for all these years, would you say, is it also anywhere there's a Chrysler plant, or was Newcastle unique?
Well, to me, it's my home, and so it's going to be, I'm going to be a little prejudiced on that part, but yeah, I can recall back years ago, the 6:30, 2:30 whistles that they used to blow. I don't know if you remember that or not, but you always know what time of the day it was by the whistle from Chrysler,
Uh-huh.
you know? And, that's something that, you don't hear no more, you know? But I thought that's unique, is you didn't hear nothing like that at the other plants, you know?
Mhm.
But I guess because of it, I don't know why they did it before, but maybe.
That was a common sound in Newcastle
Yeah.
for many years.
Right, absolutely right, yeah, yeah.
What's your earliest memory of the Newcastle factory? Were you there any at all as a kid, or?
Well, I was there, yeah, whenever they had the big strike, you know, for the pension. And thank goodness that that came about, that I've got the pension, the good pension I've got today, you
Uh-huh.
know.
You were there as a kid when they were striking about it?
Well, that was in early 50s.
Early
Yes.
fifties?
Mhm. So I can remember that very well. And of course, back then, you didn't have the benefits that you had today as far as when you was on strike. Or even unemployment as far as that's concerned, you know.
Of course, there's a real famous story about the plant, how it came to be with Jonathan Maxwell and Benjamin Briscoe, and how they were in Muncie, and a couple of guys from Newcastle went down and talked them into coming here, and they had the chicken dinner at the Nip and Tuck Club, the sign of which is in front of us. Did you ever hear anybody talk about that particular story and have any
You know,
insight on it?
I can't really remember if I have or not, to be honest with you. I'm sure it's probably come up sometime or another, but I don't recall.
When the factory was doing well, Dale, what was life like in Newcastle?
Very good. People coming up from Kentucky, Tennessee, you know, had a lot of room and board places around where people they come up, you know, stay all week and go home on weekends. And, used to be a saying on Memorial Day, well, you got the big little 500 people going back to Kentucky, you know. But it's unbelievable how it was when things was going good. I mean, you had to, up on Broad Street, you had to take your car up there and park it if you wanted a place up on Broad Street to be on Broad Street, you know. But no, it was something. I can recall them days, them great days.
I can remember as a kid myself, my dad circling the block 2 or 3 times, looking for a place to park in downtown Newcastle.
Yeah.
And downtown Newcastle was, as you said, a busy place then.
Yeah, it sure was. Like I sure love to see those good times again.
It's interesting to me, during World War II, the things Chrysler made kind of stopped, and attention turned to helping the war effort. Do you remember anything about what happened at Chrysler during World War II, or hear any stories from anybody about?
I can just vaguely remember that there was a lot of women working there then. You know, because of shortage of men, I guess. But other than that, that's about all I can recall on it.
Describe the parts made in Newcastle for Chrysler products, and maybe elaborate on some of the things you might have been involved with in your career.
Well, when I first come back down here, of course, I've been involved in the union for some time, and I hadn't really done any manual labor, so to speak. But I went to the East End, and out there you put dies in, and you got keys you knock in and out, and you got probably a 25-pound sledgehammer that you have to knock them shims out with. And I had my doubt where I could even do that. But, you know, I surprised myself. I thought I'd done pretty good. I think I'd done as good, better than the guys working with. And he was a big man. But it's amazing. You got just a little piece of steel comes down a chute, hotter than fire, and goes through that press, and comes out formed into a part, you know. But it's just something to see. And the way those guys work on those presses, they definitely earned every dime they made. It's hard work.
How did the machinery and processes for making those parts change over the years?
Out there, I can't recall them changing that much. Because they're not really much, you know, you got a foreman, then you got two foreman slots, and then you got a slot where it cuts them out of the trim, you know. So I can't recall it really changing that much out there while I was there anyway, you know. But it's a dirty job. But I enjoyed working. I enjoyed working out there. I really did. The guys worked together as a team, and we was there to get the job done, and that's what the guys did. They did an excellent job. They had a supervisor, but they didn't really need one, because they knew what they needed to do, and they got it done, you know.
Let's go back to when you first started working at Chrysler. Did you have to go through a job interview?
I don't think so. I can't recall. I went to work when I was 18, and tickled to death to get a job. I think I started out at $1.25 an hour, and they just, of course, you had a 90-day probationary period, and but I don't recall any interview other than the fact that putting in an application and, you know, calling me in to get me ready to go to work.
And when did you start working after the interview? Did you the next day or
the best I could call there, I think we went to work probably the next day.
The next
Yeah,
day?
yeah.
Wow. I know the years kind of run together, but what you would say your most favorite memory or memories of working at Chrysler? What do you remember the most?
Get my first paycheck, I guess. I recall, of course, like I say, I'd been working at a filling station and making $1 an hour, but just getting that first paycheck, and I think when me and my wife both got married, I was 18 when we got married, and we both had, all we had was a paycheck. She worked at Delco Remy and I worked here. But I'd say that was probably the best memory I can think of, is getting my first check.
Over the years and the generations, Dale, Chrysler workers were among the biggest contributors in Newcastle causes. You guys were just always really generous when it came to supporting things like the First Aid Unit, Salvation Army. Please share some of your memories and experiences about how Chrysler workers raised money for the public good.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I can recall is the First Aid Unit, when Chuck Woods was involved, and when they started raising money for that, and the Chrysler employees were always very generous in giving to the First Aid Unit, and I think that's one of the reasons why it is there where it's at today, is because of Chrysler, the Chrysler employees. And then along that same line, very, very generous in giving, as we talked about before, is Christmas time, you know. I can't recall how much, but different years, different amount of money, but the president of the union was always involved, the plant manager was involved, working together as a team to try to get money to help the ones in need. And both those, of course, the United Way, they always were involved in the United Way. I always give the United Way. It was a payroll deduction, very easy to contribute. So, but overall, very generous. Very, and helping out in different ways.
I understand Chrysler workers continue to get together on a regular basis, even though the plant's been gone for a few years. Describe the bond Chrysler workers continue to have and the atmosphere at these meetings.
Well, I just like to go back, bring this up to where it come about. They were in the process of thinking about selling the Union Hall, and you know, we got a lot of retirees around here in Henry County, and I brought it up to the mayor then, Jim Small, and the city council, that it'd be a crying shame to lose that building for the benefit of the retirees. So Mayor Small took it upon himself to mail a letter to the original director, and this is how it's all come about to where we're still at where we're at today. And to be able to continue to have this Union Hall for the benefit of people to come. Maybe it might just be one day a week that we come together, but the benefit is supposed to be there, but a little bit of complications there, but people still get together. We have a retiree dinner once a month. Still have a pretty decent turnout. Retirees have breakfasts once a month, first Monday of the month. And it's just something that, you know, I feel that people just don't want to give up on getting away from one another, you know. And so it's you know, it's a good place to have, that people can go and know that they still have a little feel of what's taking place, you know, in their lives, you know.
That Union Hall's still important.
Yeah, the Union Hall's still there. The Union Hall's still there because of different parties involved helping to offset the cost to maintain it, you know. Because it costs money just like anything else, but retirees, once again, have been very good. We have a retiree fund, you know, for that benefit that we pay dues once at $2 a month. But slowly our retirees are dying off, you know.
Yeah. Any idea how many retirees we have in Newcastle?
I believe, well, maybe, you know, in Henry County, somewhere around 4,000, I believe it is. I keep hearing that number. I could go with that amount of money that they take in a month to really get an actual figure, but I think that's what I keep hearing, around 4,000. That's still left here in Henry County. At least paid dues, I'll put it that way.
Now, the old plant has been gone for a few years now. There is sort of it's almost like a memorial that's left behind, a little bit of the facade left behind. I've heard people say that it's hard for them to drive by that location now. How do you feel about that? Is it difficult for you to drive by and not see the old plant there?
Well, I guess you'd say it'd always be difficult, but you can still, the concrete slab that's there, you know, drive by there. I vision maybe going in and seeing different people and different things that we've done, you know. We had a couple guys that was furnace repair there, and occasionally we'd have meals out in front of the part of the plant there. But you know, as far as the plant is concerned, it's good that at least there's still something there. I've got a daughter-in-law working there now, so she, like she said, you know, it's kind of odd that now that I'm gone, she's there, you know. But no, I don't think a plant will ever be like it was at one time, but it's good that there's still a plant there, you know.
I'm going to throw out some topics related to Chrysler. You know, the factory's had many ups and downs as well as pivotal moments during its life in Newcastle. I'll throw these topics out and get your response to each one. What about AccuStar?
You look at it, I didn't see much changes as far as changes is concerned, as I can recall. I just look at it from standpoint, we still had a job, I guess,
Mhm.
you know.
The modern operating agreement.
Well, there's some good points and bad points to it. I thought that, of course, that applies down here when I was involved in it. I thought it worked pretty well. Overall, it gives some people a sense of responsibility. But I do think if they hadn't went to it, that there's probably a possibility that the plant would have been closer sooner than it was.
Mhm.
But I thought that was a big step for Noel. He was the president of the union at that time, to step up and, do what he had to do for the benefit of the employees. And, I think overall it turned out pretty good.
You think it extended the life of the
Oh,
plant?
yes, definitely. I did, definitely. A lot of people retired from down there that probably would have got a chance to retire if they hadn't have done it.
Mhm.
Definitely. I know he got criticized a lot, and, of course, it's a good thing International Union took him. They might have hung him before. That's leadership.
Yeah,
You
you
know?
gotta do the hard things,
Yeah.
don't you?
Mhm.
Yeah. Senator Lugar's Productivity Award, do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Just vaguely, but yeah, I do remember it, yeah.
Quite a sense of pride
Yeah.
for the plant here.
Yeah, it was. Mhm.
What about the Daimler Chrysler merger?
Well,
Not a very popular move, was it?
no, it wasn't a popular move, but, once again, his jobs are still there, and, I don't, you never know about situations like that. All you can figure is that, the dollars and cents involved, and people have to do what they have to do to maintain, and, so.
And then the last topic I have is Metaldyne.
Well, Metaldyne, it's extended the life a little bit, once again.
And of course, a lot of these things were obviously out of your control.
Right,
And,
absolutely
so you
right,
guys
yeah.
Did
Right.
you ever feel like you were on board a ship and sometimes the waters were a little rough and but you just had to hang on?
Well, you hear all kinds of rumors when you're in a plant, and all you can do is maintain your jobs and try to do the best job you can for the people you're working for, and hopefully that you'll be able to survive, Like I say, I went from $1.25 an hour. When I retired, I was making a little over $25 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And the last 3 or 4 years I worked there, I made over $100,000 a year, so, a good place to work.
That's quite a
Yeah.
quite a progression
Yes,
over
yeah.
the years, isn't it? What is it you wish the general public today understood about Chrysler and its efforts over the years?
Well, I've heard so many times people go by and say that Chrysler employees are lazy or don't do this, or, see them sitting out, but if they really realize that the employees did do their job, they might see them sitting out, but they fulfilled their obligations as far as productivity was concerned. And, give them an opportunity to get outside, maybe and sit down and watch the traffic go by, or, of course, we have breaks, and, but sometimes people that never work in the plant just don't understand that. And I think this is true with a lot of things in life. Until you walk in their shoes, you shouldn't be criticized,
Well, and I guess while that work was going on, it was a little bit of a difficult place to work from a physical standpoint, wasn't it? I mean, in terms of the heat and in terms of the just the labor that was involved.
Absolutely right. There was no air conditioning down there, and we had a lot of, at one time we had animal fans, but we were able to get fans and different ways to cool off. But that plant down there years ago was a lot different than your newer plants today, where most of them are air conditioned, you know.
Mhm. What are you most proud of or grateful for in your years of working at Chrysler?
Well, of course, my pension. I got a good pension out of it. I'm grateful that the Lord gave me a good 45 years. You know, time and time again, I retired, signed up to retire 3 times before I actually went, because of the fact that I didn't think there was anything to do. After I retired, I'd worked all my life, I'm just grateful that for the health that I had, that we're able to maintain, and I feel like do a good job for the Chrysler. You know, I think I pulled my weight, and I think I earned what I got today. You know.
We're very fortunate to have with us now Jim Robertson, who is plant manager at the local Chrysler plant for a time. And Jim, thank you for being with us. I want to ask you some questions about your time with Chrysler. First of all, tell us about your overall involvement with the Chrysler Corporation. How many years?
I have 32 years with Chrysler. You want where I started from?
Yeah, where did you start from?
Okay, I started in engineering. I always wanted to work with cars. I mean, my first word was car, according to my parents. And I've loved cars ever since I can remember. And I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but my junior high yearbook says, what are you going to be? And it says mechanical engineer. And so that's what I became with the University of Illinois. I got mechanical engineering and wanted to work for the auto industry. It was a great time to graduate college in 1969 because there were more companies interviewing than there were graduates. So you could really pick and choose where you wanted to go. And I interviewed with all the big 3, and I included Pratt & Whitney. I went out to Connecticut, interviewed them, because I had a summer job in college in Boston, and that was a way that I could get a paid-for trip out to that area of the country and drive around, visit old friends. But I ended up with Chrysler, and I have really no regrets of that whatsoever. Even in spite of all the things that have transpired, I've been blessed to know and work with a lot of really wonderful people.
And now, what brought you to Newcastle?
Oh Lord, there's kind of a joke about that with some of the management people that I worked with at Chrysler, at Newcastle. They said that if you ticked off enough people, they'd send you to Newcastle. And the truth is, I started engineering, and I worked at the carb lab for 3 months. I went in the engine lab, and in fact my first assignment was a 346 barrel program, which I was really excited about. And after a few years, I managed to get in race engine development, and I worked on that for 5 years, which was a wonderful experience. And then one of the many times Chrysler fell on hard times, I had to find a real job, and I chose to go into manufacturing. I thought I'd work in manufacturing a few years, get that experience, and come back to engineering. So I went into the Trenton engine plant in Trenton, Michigan, as a contact engineering supervisor, and ended up, the big deal we did there was launch the 2.2 engine, which was the first 4-cylinder. Of course, the company was in bad straits, and IACO could come on board, and the 2.2 was the basis for the K car, and it was critical for the corporation. So we did some really innovative things to ensure the integrity of the 2.2 engine, and it became a real experience. I personally worked out in a hot test area and signed off on the parameters for the test for the first 200,000 engines.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I ended up working there, and got the attention of one of our vice presidents, who was one tough SOB, to be honest with you. But he ended up moving me to, after I moved up to resident engineering manager, and then I also got the quality manager's job, so I had them both. And then he moved me up to staff at Highland Park over quality and product engineering for all the powertrain plants for a year. And then he sent me to Kokomo. And red circled me and put me down there as quality manager. And during the 4 years I was at Kokomo, I was quality manager. I was like an operations manager over launching the 604, which was a real experience. That transmission turned out to be problematic, but it turned out to be a great transmission. It was the first electronically controlled transmission in the world, and quite frankly, they launched it at too big a volume, and it had issues. But it's now the basis for virtually all the transmissions they make over at Kokomo. It really has been a winner for the corporation in long term. But I worked there for 4 years, and it was a quality manager, resident engineering manager, operations manager, resident engineering manager, and quality manager, and then finally production manager. So all those titles in 4 years, so I obviously couldn't do any of them very well. And then the opportunity, actually they moved me. They wanted to switch places, so they sent me to Newcastle as production manager in 1991.
Yeah.
And so I'd never been to Newcastle before.
Is that right?
It was the first.
Yeah.
I drove to town, and I tell you, the first thing that impressed me, coming into the corner of 3 and 38, there were 2 huge American flags.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, boy, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And that just gave me a good feeling. And then I went to the plant, and of course in the employee entrance there was a huge American flag hanging just inside the door. I thought, that gave me a really good feeling from the onset about Newcastle. And I worked, was production manager here for 4 years, and then the plant manager for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm probably getting ahead of the game a little bit, but I got very involved with the community. I headed up the United Fund Drive. Susan Cass, wonderful lady, absolutely wonderful lady. And she came up with the idea for a day of caring, and I came to the plant and I bought onto that big time. And I think we had 10 people from the plant. And I think there were 40 people total the first time we did that. Mm-hmm. And then it just grew, oh boy.
I think the last one had 500.
Oh, they don't do it anymore?
I mean, the last one that they had,
Yeah, okay.
the most recent one, I should say, the most recent.
Well, I know it grew
Yeah,
so
yeah,
big
they
that they
still
had
do
trouble
it,
finding
yes.
enough jobs for all the
Uh-huh.
people. Wonderful experience and a great community endeavor. I enjoyed working with Susan. In fact, I dug this shirt up today because this is a logo
Oh, yes, it is, yeah.
that I don't know if it's a current one, but we talked about it. She showed it to me and I thought it was great. What a good logo. Because one of the ways we sold the United Fund, the plant didn't give very much money to United Fund when I came here, and I was more than embarrassed. So the next United Fund drive, I met with every individual on the plant in small groups on all 3 shifts to tell them about what the United Fund does in this town. And I had management people and union people go out and visit all the various
Agencies
that benefit from the United Fund. And then they came back and reported in these meetings firsthand, so they could see firsthand where their money goes. And there was a bad taste in some people's mouth because the United Fund had some money issues at the national level, and at that time, the local United Fund had disassociated itself from the national one. And so all the money stayed right here, and that was a selling point. And we took the giving of the plant from, I think, like $30,000 up to $130,000 or something like that.
Wow, that's
And
remarkable.
we were able to do some really good stuff.
So it sounds like your first impressions of Newcastle were very true because you became involved almost instantaneously in the community, and I tell you, just from my perspective, by the time you left, I mean, people would have thought you were a Newcastle native. I mean,
Well, it's funny, when you come into a new place, everybody wants to tell you about other people. Oh, look out for him, or watch out for them, or don't mess with him. And I'm a firm believer that I would rather form those opinions myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because you never know, you might miss a real opportunity. Because some of the people that I was warned to stay away from turned out to be some very innovative, creative people. Mm-hmm. And just given the opportunity, then they would blossom. And that happened here at the plant, and forming your own opinions, because before I came here, it was the same way with the plant. I was told, man, they got a tough union over there. They've had all kinds of heartache in the past and issues with the, they almost went out of business and all this stuff. And of course, that's created the MOA, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit.
Yes.
I like to form my own opinions about people and about the situations, and I've been burnt by that on several occasions. But there's been way more good things that happened out of that mindset than bad, and I'll accept it. The times I've been burnt are minor in comparison.
I'm just curious, were you struck by any sense of history when you
Oh,
came
yeah.
to the plant
Are you
and took a look at the building and?
How could you not? When you look at the building was pretty ancient when I came here, one of the original Maxwell plants. And of course the story of that I think is wonderful, how the Newcastle forefathers went to kind of ushered the Maxwell group down here and virtually stole the plant from Muncie. And they, of course, they got together and bought the land, and I mean, it was a real community effort to bring that plant to Newcastle. And of course, the city benefited from that greatly. And of course, even the Vice President Fairchild was here for that launch.
Yes.
So it's got a wonderful history. The plant had a lot going for it. When I first came here, I did hear that they had some great working relationships that had filtered throughout the corporation between union and management. Some of it may have been exaggerated a little bit, but other parts of it were absolutely true. And that part was a real godsend. And I tried to capitalize on that and build on that was already created. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't get much more history than Chrysler and Maxwell, because Walter P. who came from Buick, and they hired him to save Maxwell. And of course, we and Dayton are two of the original Maxwell plants.
Right, yeah. There's deep history not only with Maxwell but with Chrysler, right?
Oh, yeah.
Newcastle's right at the very beginnings of the
Absolutely.
Chrysler Corporation.
At least the story goes, when I came to town, the Chrysler gave the land to the high school. I don't know that that's true, but of course, the high school was named Walter P. Chrysler High School at one time. When I came here, it was Newcastle Chrysler High School, I believe. And I thought, wow, what an impression that makes on someone who comes to town and works for Chrysler. They had a history of being a Chrysler town. Everybody here either worked at the plant or knew people or had family working at the plant. So this Newcastle had a reputation, probably as much as any facility in the whole company, as being a Chrysler town.
As far as memories of your time at Newcastle's plant, give us some of the highlights.
Oh, Lord. Well, I stayed in manufacturing because I love working with people and I got to know a lot of the hourly people. I spent a lot of time on the floor. I'm told that's more than most plant managers do. Don't know that for sure, but I did spend a lot of time on the floor. I used to get in the plant early and try to be there before the end of third shift so I could see the transition and make sure the carryover was good, transfer of information for issues and problems. And so I was always there. In fact, at that time, they only opened the gate, I think, at 6 o'clock. So I'd arrive and be waiting for the gate to open, and then pull in and then park in front and go in, because the shift changes, I recall, was at 6:30. And I got to know a lot of people. I got to know a lot of people in a funny way, because when I arrived, it seemed like there was a lot of people passing away. I can remember the guy in maintenance that had got killed in a car wreck.
Paul Ray.
Yep, Paul Ray. I only got to know him a short time, and he had died. And then there were family and friends of people in the plant that had passed away. And it seemed like for the first few months I went to a lot of funerals. But in doing it, I ended up meeting a lot of people and getting to know people better. And the fact that we had a lot of union management meetings. There wasn't just PQI, which is the Product Quality Improvement Program, that was really mandated in the bailout for Chrysler in the early 80s. They had a PQI program at Newcastle, but they also had the MOA, the Modern Operating Agreement, that was really the brainchild of Mark Stepp, who was vice president over the Chrysler account. And that saved the Newcastle plant from extinction early on. And ironically, I'd got to know Mark Stepp pretty well before I came here because of some things which is an interesting story. I don't know if you want me to go into it, but the union at Trenton Engine Plant, there was a situation where the corporation was coming out with trying to come out with their own 3.3 liter V6 engine. But the plan for the corporation at the time was not to use that, but to actually invest in Mitsubishi and build an additional plant in Japan to build a higher volume, or double the volume of the 3 liter Mitsubishi engine that we were currently using in minivans and other K cars as the option over the 4-cylinder engine. And actually a fellow named Bruce Webster, who was manufacturing engineering manager at Trenton, came to me and says, hey, you have a good rapport with the union at the plant. Do you think we could have a meeting and talk about the what ifs about the future of Trenton if we don't do something different? I said, sure. So we got all the union leadership in a room, and Bruce and I went in and we explained the whole situation, that we're a 4-cylinder plant right now. The corporation is moving toward 3-cylinder V6 engines. And if they build this other plant in Japan, it's going to take away volume of our engines. We'll probably become a 1-shift plant. And I don't know that we can be efficient as a 1-shift plant. It might be the end of us because we're too big. So it's a real concern. It's something you ought to consider. And they asked they said, we want to know if you'd like to work with us or try to go after this V6 for our plant. And they asked us to leave the room for a few minutes, and then a lady was president of the union, a lady named Pat Wolford. She asked me to come back in the room, and they said, we'll do anything you want. And later on, Pat shared with me that we've never had management talk to us that way, ever.
Really? Oh.
And they welcomed the opportunity, and then Pat came up to me later on and said, there's a big meeting down at Solidarity House on insourcing parts into the corporation and preventing outsourcing. And we'd like you to come down and make the presentation you made to us at Solidarity House. I said, I don't know, is there going to be any management people there? And she said, well, yeah, sure. I said, well, let me ask my boss. So I asked my plant manager, and he got the okay. And so I went down there, Solidarity House, and I got there very early because I wasn't sure where it was. It was right down the end of Woodward Avenue, kind of in Detroit. And nobody else was there yet. So I'm in there kind of waiting around, and a guy walks in, and I talked to people. So I said, hey, this is going to be a big day today. He said, oh yeah, it's going to be a big day. And I says, I hear even Iacocca's going to be here, because that's what Pat had told me. He said, Iacocca, he wouldn't show up here, blah, blah. And he started ranting and raving. I said, uh-oh. And then Pat and Willie Ways, who was the shop chair at Trenton Engine Plant, came in, and I said, Pat, what's the deal? And she says, oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. There's not going to be any management people here. And I said, well, I probably better be going. She says, no, please stay and make your presentation, because you can do a better job of that than any of us. I said, what the heck, I'm already there. So Willie Ways did back then we did flimsies, flip charts to show on an overhead projector. And I had my 3x5 cards for the presentation, and I made the presentation, and the place was packed. There were representatives from every Chrysler plant. And by the time I was done, they were going, yeah, we got to fight for this business. And at that time, Mark Stepp, who was the vice president over the union, said, thank you, Brother Robertson, for that impassioned presentation. And I told Pat, I said, I think I'm leaving now. So I left and went back to the plant, told my boss what had happened. And
what you just described is not what, at least in my opinion, not what people would typically think of as a plant manager with union people. It seems like that there's this impression that heads are butting all the time. What's your philosophy about that, and how did you carry that over here in Newcastle?
where there's always some people where you're butting heads with all the time, and that's almost guaranteed. But the vast majority of the people are really great people, and they want to do what's right. And trying to work through that situation and come up with a good product and a good working relationship is a constant struggle. But it's something very worthwhile, and the positives that can come out of that are just amazing. To go back to that situation for a second, Pat Wolford went and told Mark Stepp who I was after that meeting. And his comments were, that's what I've been trying to get all my career, management and union working together to get more business. And because of that, I actually became friends with Mark Stepp. And in fact, at Newcastle, once I was butting heads with the union, I says, well, why don't I just call Mark Stepp and have him come down? You don't know Mark Stepp, because Mark Stepp saved the plant. He was like a saint to the people at Newcastle. So I called up Mark and he came down and he talked to all of us. And it was a really good chance to clear the air on some issues. And it upped my street cred a ton with the people in the plant because here I knew the guy, I knew him pretty well, the guy that saved the plant. Working with the union, it's just what you have to do, you know. Trying to make positives out of negatives, trying to turn something that's not going well into something positive. And sometimes it's a real struggle, sometimes it goes better than usual because there are certain people in the union that try to push for inefficiencies. Because they thought, you know, you're working them too hard or whatever. And I thought, you know, we've got standards made and we need to push for what's fair and equitable for all of us because the future of the plant is dependent on how we perform. The quality of the products we make, the budgetary performance we do, all the various ways we're measured from safety issues and everything, you know. That's our reputation, and the better we do at all those measurables, and the more we can sell ourselves to the corporation to get new product in here.
How many years do you think the MOA agreement added to the life of the plant here in Newcastle?
Well, it wouldn't have been there when I got there. So it, and I'm not sure how many years the MOA had been in effect, but I'm guessing at least 4 or 5, if not more. More than that? Yeah. More than that before I got there. And of course it lasted, so I got there in 91, so at least probably 83, 84, I'm guessing when the MOA went in, and that's just a guess, but it lasted until, well, I'm not sure what the last year was, when of course Metaldyne bought the plant, and then ran it for a while, and then Asahi and the Japanese took over Metaldyne, and then they took the business elsewhere. But I had some amazing relations with a lot of people in the union. The last president I worked with, a fellow named Steve Stevens, I thought the world of, and I shared with him more information than I probably ever legally should have. And we worked together and we fought for a new plant. In fact, that became a kind of a rallying point. A manufacturing engineering manager named George Higgs at Newcastle came with me with the idea. You know, you're always talking about a new plant, the idea of replacing this old facility because it won't last forever. And so he had a designer draw up a what a new plant could look like on this site. And I thought that's a great idea. And so we used it as a rallying point, and we had a goal for 2,000 employees by the year 2000.
I remember that.
We never reached that, but it was definitely something to rally around and work toward. And then when I told them, new employees, that means productive jobs. That doesn't mean freeloading jobs or extra people hired not to make something happen. That means productive jobs so we can be efficient and make more product and sell ourselves to the corporation. Because one thing that was crucial, as a component supplier, we had to compete heads up against outside suppliers, which wasn't true of certain plants. The corporation always considered the assembly plants, the stamping plants, the engine plants, and the automatic transmission plant as core plants, and stamping plants as core. All the other Chrysler plants were component suppliers that had to compete directly with outside suppliers. So if we couldn't compete with somebody on the outside, then we were in deep trouble, and we wouldn't keep the product. So that became a real battle, and we did pretty well. We had our quality manager at the time was a fellow named Larry Day. I first met him when he was chief inspector over at Kokomo. I thought the world of him. I recommended him for the job over here when I was at Kokomo. And then ironically, I ended up following him over here, not knowing at the time that would happen. And so we had a great working relationship, and he fought and I fought together up in engineering for every component we could get to put in that plant. And we did some amazing things. I think it's one of the questions down the list, but we had a situation where the new minivan, I think that came out in 1997, maybe it was maybe a decade off. things tend to run together.
They do.
But it was the first modern, really modern minivan, and it used a cradle under the front suspension to mount the suspension and the engine. And it was a huge die casting, and they were having lots of trouble with the suppliers and machining it. And my boss, Bill Smith, was in the plant, and kind of off the cuff was explaining about the corporation, how much trouble they're in because we can't make enough minivans because we can't get enough cradles. And said it would be a real feather in your cap if you could come up with some way of making that. Well, that's all the incentive I need. I made a couple calls that night after Bill left and said, this is something we gotta go after. And everybody rallied, including one of my nemesis, the Skilled Trades Committeeman, Troy Gardner. We got Gene Ingram join us because he can refresh my memory on some of the names. The situation with the cradle. Troy and the maintenance people and the union people and the engineering people, both union and management, plant engineering, and put together a proposal on converting a line to make that cradle. And because of that, we ended up getting $12.5 million investment for the plant. And we actually completed the line. By the time we got the line ready, they had got their act together up in northern Indiana where they made this part, and they didn't need us. But we had got that investment for the plant, and we were able to use that line and convert it for something else for the plant to make us more efficient. So it became a winner, and even Troy called me one night and thanked me for for pushing that and making it happen, because we went together. In fact, we got together, we were going to go to Detroit to make our presentation. And I got to admit that it didn't go over well with some people initially, because there were some people in manufacturing that already decided Toledo Machine was going to get that cradle. And in fact, my immediate boss, which was between me and Bill Smith, was really upset because he was working with the plant manager at Toledo to make that happen. And when he found out we had a proposal, he was not a happy camper. But then when he heard the proposal, he had to admit that it was good. And then we went north to Detroit, union and management, to make the proposal. And I remember we were getting together and Troy was going to have all the union people in one car, and I said, no way, we're splitting. He said, well, we smoke. I said, I'll put up with it. We are going to mix, we're going to be in both vehicles, we're going to ride together and talk about this thing, and we're going to work on this thing together in the car, and we're going to work together when we get there. And we got up there and we made a gangbusters presentation, and we won the opportunity to do that. And we got the $12.5 million investment, which actually added to receiving inspection. There was an additional building built on in the back of the plant, in addition to handle the cradle.
And again, you say this is with a guy that you used to butt heads with all the
Used
time.
to. I did, even after that, we ended up butting heads. And I had a conversation with Troy, I don't know if this is appropriate, but we were having some issues, and I invited Troy up to my office. I had an open door most of the time, and anybody could come up and talk to me. But Troy and I were talking, and Troy was really a smart guy. And outside of work, he was a funny guy, good guy to be around. But in work, boy, he could be a real pain for me. And we got talking about the future of the plant and the town, and he told me in no uncertain words that the plant was their plant, not my plant. Because you plant managers, you come and go, and we're here for the long haul. And I said, Troy, I can understand why you would say that. But while I'm here, it's my plant too. And I've got everything I own and invested in it. And if the plant goes away, guess what? I'll end up with a job somewhere, and you probably won't.
Right.
So I want this place to succeed, more so than you probably can ever realize. He says, yeah. You guys always say that when you come here. And then he got off on a tangent. He says, you know, you can herd those production guys around, but us maintenance, we're special. And he said, I get elected for two things, more ass time and more overtime. And I said, Troy, this conversation is over. And that was the mindset of a lot of people. I mean, it just was. It wasn't everybody by a long shot, but that's kind of the typical of the battle you kind of had to win all the time and deal with, because there was that element out there. And if that element won, there wouldn't be a plant.
Right.
And unfortunately, in the long term, there isn't a plant. Now, whether that was a component of that, it didn't help. But I was committed to work around that and every other hurdle to make the place more successful, and people like Larry Day that was fighting for new business, and myself that went to Detroit and argued for it, and we won over a lot of things, and we got some very positive attention for the plant. I know that after I was manager 2 or 3 years, we had a senior plant manager meeting, and they were recognizing the plants in various divisions for outstanding performance. And Newcastle, out of all the component plants, was given a trophy about yay tall. It had a big Craftsman wrench on it. I'll never forget it. It had a 1-inch Craftsman open-end wrench on the trophy. And it was for outstanding performance. And they said, yeah, you might want to go back and share it with some of your staff. Well, I said, heck, share it with the staff. I shared it with the whole plant. Had town hall meetings and showed what we could do. This is what we can accomplish when we work together to make this place successful, and go after new business, and get this kind of a positive attention for the plant. And of course, my goal was to get so many positives going for the plant that they'd be too embarrassed to shut us down, because if we do things right and get positive attention. So, but we had some pluses, and there were some minuses too. I mean, there were times when I kind of got undermined. We'd have a vice president come to the plant, and someone would drop a bomb. In fact, that happened shortly after I became plant manager. I thought we had some things going the right way, and I was set up. I always let the union president talk first, and he told the Dennis Pauley, who was executive vice president of World Manufacturing, that I was messing up everything here at Newcastle, that they had an excellent working relationship with the previous plant manager, Dennis Mason, and that I was screwing everything up, and he went on and on, and I think Steve Jones was behind it, to be honest with you, because he was, and after the union president at that time made that presentation, I came up and I said, well, that's not quite the introduction I was expecting. And I think you'll see for yourself when you go out in the plant, that's not exactly how things are working around here. And so that kind of led into the day, but again, things weren't always smooth. And that's part of what you had to work around, and we got through that, and actually ended up having a good working relationship with that president.
The plant here had some really productive years.
Oh, it did. We did some amazing things. That happened after that presentation, so we got through that. But I love the plant. I actually love the town. I was very much involved in the town, although I didn't live here. I ended up building a house up in Yorktown. But Susan Cassidy was wonderful to work with.
And there were other causes too, the Chrysler employees and
Oh, yeah.
the plant stepped up to help.
Oh, yeah. The people in the plant were amazing.
I don't remember
had
if there was a first aid unit drive when you were here or not, but I know that's been something that.
We had a group in the plant that would, emergency response team. Best I've ever seen throughout the corporation. And Gail Bernard, I saw him literally die. He turned bluer than your jeans, Gene. This emergency response team came up and brought him back. I watched him bring him back. And that was all volunteers out of the plant floor that were on that team. And it was amazing what they accomplished. And whenever we would have, and oftentimes we would have issues with pieces of equipment, major breakdowns. And there was so much talent at that plant that they were always able to get together and rally the troops and get the equipment back up and save our bacon. And those successes were amazing. I'm trying to think of the one guy in maintenance. Well, this guy was just a regular maintenance guy, but he was a machine repairer.
Ted Bales.
Ted Bales. Thank you. Great individual. Really great individual. Quiet, didn't talk much, but Ted could rally the troops and he would make stuff happen. And he was a really good guy. And every now and then when some of the people in the union were trying to do something that was a little out of reason, Ted would sneak over to me and he says, "Don't let them beat you down." He says, "Just do what you know is right."
This is a union guy,
This is a
talking
union
to a
guy.
management guy.
And he was a guy that I had very much respect for. In fact, sometimes I would not supposed to say this, probably sneak him a 6-pack or a case of beer after work for going above and beyond and doing some things that just, you couldn't demand of anybody. The guy loved the people, loved the plant, and wanted the plant to succeed. And the truth of the matter is, there were a lot of individuals like that.
Well, I started
A lot
to
of
say, that's probably the part that some of the naysayers out there never saw.
Oh,
That there was a lot of good things and good people happening inside that plant. You know, some people complained that there was laziness, and of course, I mean, there's that in any occupation that you go into. But what you're describing is the beauty of what went on in there that people didn't see a lot.
That's
Because it was
right,
behind
and it's
closed
hard to communicate that in a way, because there's examples of both. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I found sleeping areas around the plant at times where people would get away, but the vast majority of the people vastly wanted that place to succeed. And I think they understood what you had to do to make it succeed. And we managed to do that for quite some time. And because there were a lot of component plants that shut down before Newcastle did. And through the efforts of a lot of people pulling together and make things happen, this plant was able to survive an awful long time.
Probably, as you said earlier in the interview, probably for 2 decades or more,
Yeah.
the life of the
Oh,
plant is
yeah.
extended because of the efforts that you've been describing.
I feel absolutely blessed to have worked with a lot of the people in the Newcastle area. There were some tremendous individuals that made things happen and were able to work with the people in the plant. In fact, shortly after I became plant manager, I had one of the many classes the corporation wanted you to make on problem solving. And the guy that taught the class was pretty good. And of course, I went back to the plant and tried to do something. It wasn't as easy as the examples in the classroom when you get to reality. So I invited him to the plant, and we worked together for some time. And we managed to get people in the plant. And one of the sayings we use: if you could have it like you liked it, what would it be? I mean, in the process.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
we would have the plant engineer, the quality engineer, the design engineer, the maintenance that worked in the area, the production people that worked in that area. We get them all in one room and go through the problem and do a real problem solving with everybody's input. And some of the people had never been asked for their input before. Well, what? And we came out of that, and the PQI was involved, and some of the MMA representatives, and all those meetings to try to get everybody and break down some of the barriers. And we got people to open up, and we managed to make improvements on processes that nobody thought was possible. But it was all done by getting the input from everybody. You know, a lot of the guys in the MOA used to say the purpose of the MOA was to get people involved. And it was, but you gotta give them the opportunity and the right set of circumstances to make that happen. The old term hired hand, meaning you wanted their hands, you didn't want their brain. But the MOA was developed, so you not only want their hands, you want their whole body and their brain, and you want their inputs. But even though the MOA said that, giving people the opportunity and the wherewithal to do that really opened a lot of eyes to the plant. A lot of people really blossomed when they were given those opportunities. And we made improvements that were far more than, the synergy developed in that group was amazing, just amazing. And then, of course, when the whole group develops a plan, when the whole group develops, they have ownership of it. And even if it's not the best plan, they make it work. Even if there's some glitches in the plan, since it's their plan, they have an ownership of it, and they really go the extra mile to make things happen. And those were very, very satisfying times when we could do that. And we did that on many, many occasions.
Jim, I wanted to, with Gene's help here, throw some names out at you and get you to react about some of the people that the plant has had over the years, people that you probably worked with. And I'll start, Ed Zachary.
Ed was a great guy. Ed was the, he might as well have been the plant manager. He was equal to it. He was the union president when I came to the plant. Big guy, used to run an axle forge, but a heart of gold. One one of the first things he did when I came here, he said, I want you to come with me and take a ride around town. I want to show you how important this plant is to the community. And so Ed and I got in the van and he drove me all over and showed me how much the plant meant to the town, and showed me houses with dirt floors, showed me, you know, the plant had been on upswings and downswings. The plant used to be huge at one time, and it was on a downswing when I first came here, or kind of hit a low spot. And he did an excellent job of showing me the importance of the Chrysler plant to the Newcastle community. We drove by his house where his mother was on the porch, and he told stories about individuals and things that had happened in the past, and that cemented a relationship between he and I of an excellent working relationship. And you know, Ed oftentimes got caught between a rock and a hard spot and had to do some things, and but I understood that, and we always had a high degree of respect for each other. And while he was with us, it was I had a great time working with Ed. And sadly, he passed away one day while I was at the plant, and it was a crushing blow to everybody at that plant, everybody, including me. And the whole plant, and I think the whole community showed up for his funeral. Mm-hmm. It was very, very touching, and it was a tough time.
Gene, you got one?
Oh yeah, Dave Ramsey.
There was a guy that I grew to love. They called him a lot of nicknames. I'm not sure I should bring most of them up. And Dave had a nickname for everybody when they walked in the plant. Not necessarily very good ones, but Dave was a guy that did probably more to make that plant, as much to make that plant work as anybody I know. He was an area manager in the back end of the plant when I came there. Well, actually, he was, he almost had he was area manager back there, but he had a special position, I think. I'm not sure. I'll call him launch coordinator at the time. So he kind of oversaw getting everything together and making things happen, launching new parts. But he had input in everything else going on in the plant too. Another guy with an absolute heart of gold, loved the plant. The people in the plant loved him because they knew he loved the plant. And the rapport he had with people throughout the whole operation was just amazing. And Dave and I became very, very close. And I ultimately made him production manager. But he was a real character and a joy to be around, and a funny guy. I know when I walked in the plant, he said, I think if it isn't Little Lord Fauntleroy, I think is what he called. Little Lord Fauntleroy? Oh, Wee Willie Winkle, he called me. Little Lord Fauntleroy, that was the PC man. Wee Willie Winkle. Where that came from, I have no clue. But he had nicknames for everybody in the plant. I mean, that's just the way it was. But he made things happen, and he was a great guy, and I love him dearly.
What was your nickname?
He called me Banana Nose.
Yep. I can't imagine why.
What about Noble Evans?
Noel was, he was already retired from the plant when I came to town, but he worked at for the Union Hall, and he was a great individual. I got along with Noel extremely well, and I know whenever I was having issues with some of the union leadership in the plant, I know Noel would come to my defense, because he told me, he says, I told him, I said, if you can't work with Jim Robertson, you can't work with anybody. And Noel and I, we went to the Pell classes, they called them. Pell was paid educational lead. We used to go where the Pell classes were held at Kokomo, and Noel and I would drive over there often together and share stories and work out ways of trying to get through issues. And Noel was another godsend for this community. He wanted the places to flourish and live on forever, and he fought like mad to make that happen. I think he may have been president at the time of the MOA, I'm not sure.
I think he was international liaison somehow. I
At
don't
that
think
time?
he was president.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
But he was a real asset for the Newcastle community, and he and I became very close and had an excellent working relationship. I took him for a ride over to Kokomo once in a Viper, and when we got over talking to the Pell class, he raved about how I raced all the way over there. Well, I don't really think I was going that quick. But on the way back, we had to stop because he threw up. He was a great guy, and I'll always remember him in the fondest of ways.
No?
Dennis Mason.
Oh, Dennis? Dennis was the plant manager before me. Dennis had a wealth of experience in Chrysler. He was plant manager in a lot of plants in Chrysler, and he became plant manager just only maybe a month before I came over as production manager. So we developed a pretty unique working relationship. He pretty much, as long as we could make the numbers, he pretty much let me run the plant. And in fact, as a surprise to me, when I came to the Newcastle plant, instead of being called the production manager, they called me the assistant plant manager. That was kind of the way the hierarchy worked at Newcastle. Because Barry Blaylock was production manager before I was, and he was a good guy, and he had a lot of involvement with the floor, and I tried to at least do what he did, and maybe more if I could, because I liked working, I liked being on the floor, I liked talking to people on the floor and getting an understanding and getting the input from people on the floor of what's going on. Because I've always believed that the people that operate the job, they know the nuances of the job better than anybody else anyway. And if you're gonna make changes and stuff, if you don't include their input, then you're just missing the boat. Dennis allowed me to do that pretty much. When times weren't going well, he held me accountable, which I expected to. But we're still good friends. Dennis and I, we still have breakfast at Newcastle every few months. In fact, I think we've got one planned maybe for next week.
So you're actively involved in keeping in touch with folks here?
Well, Dennis was plant manager before me, and then of course I was plant manager. Ramsey was one of the guys we still have breakfast with. The other guys we had breakfast with were Bill Smith, who's passed away, unfortunately. George Kimzik, who was an outstanding guy, who was a head finance guy in the plant when I first came there, great guy. And he's passed away since, and Will Rubeck, who was the HR manager, who was very much involved with the community, everybody knows, and worked very hard, came from the electrical plant, and worked hard to try to make the plant successful, and Will's a good guy, and he just passed away recently. So our breakfast club is dwindling, but a lot of good people, a lot of great people.
Let me shift gears here now and throw out some situations and terms and just have you respond to them, whatever comes first to your mind, like the energy crisis of the 1970s. Do you remember that?
Oh, good Lord, yes.
The impact that it had?
Yes, I was working at Chrysler when it started up in Highland Park. I'm still an engineer, working in a race group. And of course, the biggest thing was gas prices going up. And we were a manufacturer that made big cars.
Yeah.
And things had to change in a hurry. And I give some of the leaders of Chrysler the insight, and because we had the first really Chrysler or big three front-wheel drive car in the Omni Horizon, and we used an engine that really was being developed by Volkswagen, the 1.7, and but in fact that was they sent the short block to Trenton Engine Plant. Then Trenton Engine Plant built the rest of the parts and tested that motor and the Omni Horizon. Of course, then to come out with a totally corporate bigger, the K car was the answer for the energy crisis. And of course, the energy crisis put Chrysler in a bad way. We were on the verge of going out of business. Iacocca came on board. The K car was going to be our salvation, and the 2.2 became the main engine for the K car. And I worked at that up at Trenton Engine Plant. But yeah, the energy crisis turned the whole automotive industry upside down. And we as a company fought to make cars that would be energy efficient and keep the corporation going. And the L body, which is the Omni Horizon, and the K cars, and of course Reliant, and the K car and their derivatives really saved the company. And Newcastle made parts. They made knuckles for those vehicles. And Newcastle was a main player, even though I didn't realize it at that time because I wasn't here and didn't know that, but Newcastle was a main player in making that happen.
Now, when did the minivan enter the picture?
The minivan? Well, that was a brainstorm of Hal Spurlock, who's the president of the company, and Iacocca bought into it lock, stock, and barrel when he came here. And the minivan was a K-car derivative. It was made on the K-car platform. And it was designed to be a garageable van, because our big vans wouldn't fit in a lot of garages. So this was gonna be a fuel-efficient way of having a van that could carry lots of people, or carry whatever you wanted to, but having a smaller vehicle that was garageable, front-wheel drive based on the K-car.
I have driven
Great
a
deal.
minivan now for 20 years, I think, and the one's sitting out in the parking lot now. I bought it originally because we became parents of 2 kids, and they
Yep.
were wonderful vehicles for the kids. Now I've got the seats out of it, and it is so handy.
Yep.
It's just such a handy vehicle. And the one I have out in the parking lot out here has 145,000 miles on it, and
Great.
it's still running great.
Well,
And it's a Chrysler model.
I love the minivan. I've owned lots of it with my family, especially when the kids were little. You couldn't get a better vehicle. You know, Chrysler invented the minivan.
Yeah. What about AccuStar?
Well, AccuStar was really kind of gone by the time I came here.
As I
AccuStar,
recall, Gene's reaction to AccuStar was,
well, it was an effort to, it was kind of an effort to do what General Motors did with Delco, turning it into Delphi. Kind of a separate corporation within a corporation. I had a little heartburn with that, because that makes it easier to divorce yourself from that corporation. And big component plants, knowing that was kind of a mindset of Chrysler to try to, that they weren't core business, so they put them in their own little company as an aside. I was happy when AccuStar went away, when we became back as part of Chrysler, because I thought that was a lot more security, and we could deal more with the leadership of Chrysler and fight harder to get future business.
and we've talked about the modern operating agreement. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, it's funny, because after after I retired even, I taught, Mark Stepp had a summer home on Fox Lake up now around Angola. And my son always wanted to go fishing. I was never much of a fisherman, and talking to Mark, he invited me to go up fishing. So I took my son when he was smaller and went up, and we went on a boat, Mark Stepp's boat, out on a lake, and went fishing. And we had a chance to talk about the original modern operating agreement. Of course, it was his brainchild, and I said, you know, and I really gave him kudos for making that happen. I said, the one thing that I think it needed was better accountability on both sides. Because the idea of the modern operating agreement, you're supposed to trust each other. Well, trust isn't something you can tell people do, it's something you have to earn by your actions and what you do.
That's true.
Sometimes that was the union used to use that as a catch-all to me. It said, don't you trust me? And based on what you just did, no, I do not. I trust you when you do things that are for the good of all of us, and for the efficiency of the plant, for the future of the plant. And when you propose, and when you, of course, foster things that aren't in the best interest of the plant, then I have some heartburn with that. So, and I had that conversation with Mark about accountability, and he said, yeah, I could see in hindsight that there would be some issues that we could have done a little bit different. But I gave him credit. If it hadn't been for the modern operating agreement, the plant would have been here, like you said, for a couple of decades. Great guy. And, you know, it was a way of going beyond PQI, which was supposed to be union management working together to make higher quality products. And the modern operating agreement was supposed to be union management working together to make the plant more efficient and more productive. And it was supposed to get away from a lot of the work rules that were implanted over years in the history of the union. In fact, Troy Garner used to give me that. He carried in his back pocket the old contract. And he used to kept telling me, well, it's not in the new contract, we rely on the old contract. I said, no, Troy, don't try to pull that. He got me on that a couple times before I finally wised up and said, no, Troy, I'm not going there. No, you're not going to get me again. Troy got me. He was a smart guy. He got the better of me a few times before I finally wised up. But again, his heart was in the plant. He loved the people, and he just was of a mindset from the old world of what he thought should happen.
Now, is there a remnant of the modern operating agreement in play today in manufacturing plants, or how does that work? Is it-
Well, that's interesting. They certainly don't call it the
Right.
MOA again. Having been involved, I was over at the cocoa plants just recently. They had a big get together, and I toured all the plants. And Sergio Marcioni came to that. Of course, he's the head of Fiat and Chrysler now, and that they had a deal where they brought past executives that contributed to the future of Kokomo, and I was fortunate to be part of that, and a lot of plant managers, and even families of plant managers. And Marcioni has done some wonderful things that are right in line with what came out of the MOA. He's developed this world-class manufacturing, which is people involvement throughout the whole plant, working together, which was the mindset of the MOA and even of the OPQI. He's taken it a step further. They call it world-class manufacturing. And they're doing some really great things with it. But all it is the next iteration of what we were trying to do back at Newcastle, and now they're doing that throughout the whole corporation. To be honest with you, most Chrysler plants at one time or another were held hostage by maintenance, because
Yeah.
they can only perform as well as maintenance would take care of stuff.
Right.
So maintenance sometimes would do things that weren't necessarily in the best interest, even though there were some great people there. And now they've kind of bridged that hurdle with this world-class manufacturing, and they're doing some amazing things. And I like to think it all came out of those original thoughts of Frazier, the president of the union, going through PQI and the original bailout, and Mark Stepp working with the people in Chrysler doing the MOA and taking it another step. And we launched SPC at the plants, and we had the best SPC in the corporation at Newcastle. A young fellow named Dave DeKaiser, who I originally hired an SPC up at Trenton Engine Plant. He headed up SPC, brought it here, and he developed that with the people in the plant into the best performing statistical process control program in the corporation. And that got us great accolades. And that was people involvement on the floor, monitoring their own processes, and making sure they were capable, making parts that were capable and that were within the specifications allowed. And that was another, I almost forgot about that, but that was a real positive for Newcastle. Gene, you were around here a lot longer than I was. In fact, one of the first people I met from Newcastle was Gene. When I was coming
Was it
over,
really?
Gene came over to my house in Kokomo, because he was a street rodder, I was into street rods. And in fact, I think we got, the first year I was in Newcastle, there was a big car show at the Kokomo plant. Ironically, I started that car show with a PQI team. And a big group from Newcastle came up on Dave Sharp's 50th birthday, because we stopped at my house, and then we went on over to Kokomo with a big entourage of street rodders that went over to that show. And Gene, in fact, my 40 Chrysler coupe that I was building at the time wasn't really ready, but I made it look like it was kind of done from the outside and drove her over to the show that time. Anyway, a little aside.
The Daimler-Chrysler merger.
Oh, Lord.
I don't know, I might even ask you this question.
Well, that was a total surprise to me. Total. I was coming into work early that morning for an SPC meeting, a third shift SPC meeting. And when I got to the plant, I was actually trying to doing some, I used to use audio tapes, and I was doing the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People on audio tapes. I think they're great. And I was doing those going to and from work. So I didn't have the radio on, a station. And when I got to the plant, I ran into George Hicks. He says, I suppose you know all about it. I says, what are you talking about? The merger of equals between Daimler-Benz and Chrysler. I says, you gotta be kidding me. He said, no, it's all over the news. I says, oh my Lord. And I was shocked, to say the least. First of all, I love my country, I love my company, and the thought that we were going to be part of a company, and this, of course, the merger of equals turned out to be a sham anyway. We were being taken over by Daimler, and the party line in the company was a merger of equals, and I said that. In fact, I went to a Pell meeting shortly after that, and someone asked me, I said, well, a merger of equals, the union says, union people there said, it's no merger of equals, they're taking us over. And I said, well, that may be, but that's not what I've been told. And you probably have better information than I have. Because they were trying to hide the fact that, so the whole thing became kind of a sham. And we did get some good things out of Daimler. I mean, the rear suspension and the on the LX cars, and a lot of things that came from Daimler that we did benefit from. But the truth of the matter is, we had a lot of cash. We were a cash-rich company at the time, and Daimler made use of that cash. And they pretty much used us up, I think, in the time that we were there. There were some positives that came out of it. I remember being in a PQI meeting in Las Vegas where Wolfgang Barnard, he was telling the people, he said, I know you've heard all the stories about how we took over and we flew a big plane from Germany and we loaded up all your money in the plane and we flew it back to Germany because that's the rumors around the corporation. I'm thinking, no, they didn't fly a big plane over, they just hit a button and transferred the money. There were some things that went in, there was a lack of transparency on some of the things that happened, and I think Daimler didn't do us any favors in the long run, although there were things we got from them that we did benefit from. And then, of course, we got sold to Cerberus, and that was a downhill slide because they, I mean, venture capitalists, that's what they do. They buy companies, break them up, make money, and then leave the dredges for whatever they can get rid of them for. So that was not a good deal.
And the last chapter was Metaldyne. What do you think?
Well, Metaldyne at the plant, it saved the plant for a while. I met some of the people with Metaldyne. That was after I left the plant. I knew some of the guys that were even plant managers. They came from Chrysler, that were even plant managers when it became Metaldyne. And of course, Rodney ended up being a plant manager for Metaldyne. Good guy. But I think the writing was on the wall when they were sold to Asahi, I think was the company that bought them.
Asahi.
And they ended up just taking the business elsewhere, which is usually what happens. They buy a plant to get the business, and then they take it and put it in one of their own facilities. So that was unfortunate.
Jim, what would you say you wish the general public today understood about Chrysler's production efforts over the years that maybe they don't understand?
When you say Chrysler, to me, Chrysler represents all the people in the whole company that work for Chrysler. And I absolutely feel blessed over my career to have worked with a lot of really, really neat people in a lot of different areas. Chrysler, it's like a cat with 9 lives, you know. It seemed like a decade didn't go by where Chrysler tried to go out of business. And by hook or crook, they managed to pull it together and come back and then absolutely excel for a period of time and then fall back. Right now, we are part of Fiat, and quite frankly, you know, Fiat was doing well when Fiat took on Chrysler, and now Chrysler is pretty much, I think, supporting the other side of the pond. Chrysler's doing quite well, and Fiat is not doing as well as they would like to be doing. So I'm not sure where that's all going to end up. As long as Sergio's heading the company, I really have some very positive feelings. He's an amazing individual, and he loves the business, and he loves the people, and he's allowed really good people to come up from areas and to some high positions that I think are wonderful. The fellow who's vice president over all the Kokomo facilities right now is a young man named Brian Harlow is the vice president. He was a plant engineer when I worked over there in the late 80s. And now he's rose to vice president. He's a great guy, a tremendous guy. Brad Clark, who I ended up hiring for SBC when I was at Kokomo, came over here and I gave him an opportunity to work in production. He was in finance, and he did an outstanding job. He's one of the best. You know, there was a fellow at Trenton Engine and Dave Ramsey and Brad Clark are a few of the people who were some of the best supervisors and area managers in production I ever had work for me. He had an excellent way of working with people. He had an excellent way of holding them accountable. He kept book on people, and by and large, if you don't address bad behavior, you condone it. And so the only way of addressing it is keep it. Well, you have to, not only in your family, but at work, in the country, in any organization. If you don't address bad behavior, you end up condoning it, and you lose control. And those guys I mentioned were some of the best at doing that out on the plant floor. And they kept book on a bad actor, somebody that repeatedly did things wrong, he kept a history of it. Well, it took work to do that, but they had the mentality and the attitude and the willpower to make it happen, keep book on people, and they managed, if you had a bad act, they'd fire them, they'd get it done.
Tell us about the time Bob Eaton was here and what could have been.
Bob Eaton came to visit the plant. There was a period of time between Bob and the two Bobs, Bob Eaton and Bob Lutz, that they were going around visiting, trying to hit all the plants. And just to give a pep talk and what was going on with Chrysler and have a little word from the top. Bob Eaton came to visit us, and we went all out. We had a lot of the community involved. We had the plant looking spick and span. We had presentations all through the plant for him, and we had a presentation upstairs. Union management worked really good together that day. I mean, we were in lockstep presenting the good side and what Newcastle had to offer this corporation. And Jack Schultz was head of maintenance at the time, and he had a sign built up on the back 40 here on the property of the plant. And as we took Bob for a tour around the facility, we showed him all the land we had, and there was this big sign, future site for a Chrysler manufacturing facility or something to that effect. But we did a good job of reinforcing the fact that we are part of Chrysler, we're an asset to Chrysler, and we have the ground, the people, the attitude, and the intellect, and the everything you need, that if you want to put more manufacturing facilities on a Chrysler site, we're the spot you ought to do it. And that mindset is the mindset of all the presentations throughout the day, and I think we won him over, I really do. Because we had won some transmission parts. We made some planetary pinion carriers and input clutch hub. We made a handful of transmission parts because Kokomo makes virtually made all the automatic transmissions for our corporation. Didn't have capacity for some parts, and so they put the added volume over at our plant. And it was a constant battle. After they put the added volume, they wanted to use us as the expansion volume. They wanted to run theirs at full volume all the time and just use us when they needed us. And I won that battle because they ran them both the same. So when the volume went up, we both went up. When the volume went down, we both went down. So I said, I can't run an operation like that. When we're in and out of it, we shut it down for a period of time and start up. So we had good transmission parts, and we made them as good, if not better, than Kokomo did. Because it's always a problem with internal suppliers. If you're making the same part, you always try to knock down the other supplier's parts. But I got a guy named Jerry Hall that came from Kokomo, who ran off all the machines in Kokomo, knew the capability of all the equipment in Kokomo, and ran off our equipment and became the area manager over all the transmission parts. He knew how they made their parts, and he knew how we could make ours. And whenever they tried to find fault with ours, we went and showed them that our parts were better than theirs, and they were. And getting Jerry over here was a real asset, and we absolutely killed that business. We did an outstanding job supplying Kokomo with transmission parts. And the corporation was looking for more capacity in transmissions. They were going to build, actually, the Indiana Plant 1 that's now on the north side of Kokomo was going to build a Mercedes-designed transmission, which became the transmission for the LX cars, the 300, the Magnum, and what became the Charger, and also in the Challenger, all those LX body cars made up in Bramley in Canada. They were going to build another transmission plant. And of course, we had done a good job of selling Eaton. If they want to do something different, do it here. And I got the call from, first call was from a fellow named Howard Pageant in Advanced Manufacturing Engineering that said Newcastle 1, the new transmission plant, was going to be built on our grounds. I was elated.
And this was in what year?
Probably in 98, 99, that time frame, somewhere in there, maybe 97.
Yeah, it's about time they tore the hammer shop down. It was in
Yeah,
98.
probably.
Yeah.
Probably, good point. But anyway, then I got the call from Bill Smith, who was the director over all the component plants, and he told me the same thing. It's a done deal. It's approved all the way up through Eaton. It's signed off. It's all over but the shouting. The new transmission plant is gonna be built in Newcastle. Man, I was elated, and of course, it wasn't common knowledge, and I had to be somewhat closed-mouthed. I shared it with a couple people, and then the bottom dropped out. The Kokomo, which has one of the largest locals in the company, either threatened to strike or strike. I'm not even sure what it was, but word got up north to Detroit, and that was turned around. And the decision was made to put the new transmission plant on the north side of Kokomo. So I had a few hours of thinking that we really had secured, long-time security for the Newcastle facility. I really had planned to retire from this facility, and I was looking forward to really, and I came from the transmission plant. We had good transmission people already on board here that had come from Kokomo. Mike Manley came from, we had a lot of people come from Kokomo. Larry Day came from Kokomo. Of course, Jerry Hall, I brought over from Kokomo to run the area. We had a lot of people in commonality. We had good communications between the two areas. And I thought this was going to be a real win-win for our community. And it was a real sucker punch in the gut when we lost it.
And the result, if it had happened, would have been employment.
Well, automatic transmissions are core business. And that's something they don't even look at sourcing outside. They go to Chrysler. And we would have been an automatic transmission plant supplier, and that would have been, between us and Kokomo, we would be part of the core business of the corporation.
So, not inconceivable that 2,000 people may have been working at Chrysler?
Oh, yeah.
Here in Newcastle?
Oh,
that
yeah,
happened?
absolutely. When I first came here, I think we were at 700-800 people. And we never got to the 2,000 by 2,000 that we
Right.
talked about, but we were over 1,760, 1,770, 1,780, somewhere in that area. The idea of pulling for that, and pushing for that, and gets people working together, you know. When you get people working together with a common goal, there's just no window what you can accomplish. And we had a lot of that going at Newcastle. A lot of good people. A lot of good people wanting to keep that plant going for a long time.
What I shared with them when they talked to me that I saw the Newcastle people is in adversity, they were the best.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, when their backs were against the wall, they were the best.
Well, a lot of my bosses used to call that farmer mentality. I says, I'll take that farmer mentality anytime. When a farmer's got a combine down out in the field, he'll get that sucker to work in a hurry. And that's the way they work the plant. If something was down and it was critical, these guys were some of the most innovative people I've ever met. They would manage to get that equipment up and running, and we made parts to protect our customers, which was key. The last thing you ever want to do is shut down one of your customers in Chrysler, because that'll give you a black eye, as big as all outdoors. So we worked awful hard at that. You know, like Gene says, we had some really, really good people that knew how to make that happen. And unfortunately, back to the situation with the transmission plant, there was an opportunity there. It was short-lived, but if that had transpired, my guess is we would still be having Chrysler right here in this town.
And there'd be 2,000-3,000 people working there?
A couple thousand probably. Who knows? You never know, because once you have a facility, depending on how that facility performs, if it does extremely well, they want to put more business in there. So, you know, there was Indiana Plant 1, now there's Indiana Plant 2. Who knows? That might have been built here also.
Plus the old KTP.
Oh, the old KTP is still over there and it's still
Yeah.
running.
You're not from here originally.
No.
So, when you used to hear the name Newcastle, did you think that's a Chrysler town?
I was told it was. When I first heard the name Newcastle, quite frankly, when I first heard the name Newcastle, I heard there was big union issues, and because I was been in the company since '69, and so when the MOA came into being, I was elsewhere. But you know, you hear what goes on in the corporation, and there was some radical things going on in Newcastle, so that didn't have a very good connotation to it. But later on, when I was working at Kokomo in the 4 years prior to coming to Newcastle, I'd never been here, but I kept hearing stories about, that Newcastle, they're figuring out how to get union and management work together. They don't even need, there was even a story, they don't even need management over there, unions running the plant. They got all kinds of things going on. And they had the launch teams, and the guys that would go out to the customer plants, and hourly guys, and work with them, and work out problems. And all kinds of success stories were coming out of Newcastle, at least, and I thought, what a good job they're doing to sell themselves, because that's what it needs. The more you sell yourself, the more you got yourself in positive vein throughout the people in the corporation, and when they go to source parts, and when they're looking for someone to make something, they have good feelings about Newcastle. So they did a really good job.
Those launch teams healed a lot of wounds with the assembly plants.
Oh, I'm telling you. I went with the launch team a couple times into customer plants. They snuck me into the plants in the middle of the night. I talked to people, these guys had rapport with the people at the plants, at our customers, that you couldn't beat. If there was an issue with one of our plant parts, they more than not resolved the issue before it ever got anybody's attention. They went there, fixed the problem, committed to fixing, we continued to fix, and the problem never even surfaced.
Talk about the retirement ritual
Ha!
and the ceremony that went with that.
Oh, boy. Well, that was a first for me. When I first came to the plant, one of the days I was walking around, somebody apparently, I thought he'd been caught up in the machine. His clothes were all ripped up and tore up, and I went, my God, what happened to you? Oh, this is just what they do when you retire around here. My Lord. I mean, his clothes were actually, there was just, you could see his underwear and his clothes were just tattered. Apparently, when you go through out in the plant on the day you retire, they pretty much have their way with cutting your clothes up. And the first time I saw that, I was I was shocked. It got to be a little more common later on. Some people got cut up more than others. I guess it depended maybe a little bit on how popular they were out on the plant floor. But it was a sight to behold, and something that was really started by the plant manager before me, Dennis Mason. But I picked up on it. I thought it was a great thing to do. When someone retired, we would bring them up into the conference room, and they have kind of like a mini roast. Get the people they worked with to come up with them, and get their family to come in, and we would videotape the whole thing, and we would have kind of a mini roast and talk about their life and experiences and career at Chrysler, what they did, and what their plans were, and it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with that, and even the people that didn't want to do it, that finally did it, they thanked me afterwards. Because
Families especially.
families, and a lot of families come up years later and say, you know, the fellow would pass away, and they said that's one of our prized possessions, because we pull that video out every now and then and think about the fun we had at that meeting, and with the people at Chrysler and going over his career. I ran into Donnie Isaacs a few weeks ago, who retired from the plant, and we were at a fireworks display at a mutual friend's house. And he saw me and rooted me out, and he was kidding me, and because he's a very innovative guy. He's got some pretty bizarre street rods and a lot of stuff that he builds. And he worked at a forge. I think originally he worked around. But he commented that retirement ritual, he said he had so much fun at that, because I had seen him at James Dean before, and I thought the lady he was with was one of the girls I'd seen before. But I was wrong. I said, of course I've met you before at James Dean. Oh, wrong one. I think Danny's been married 4 or 5 times. But
You know, to hear you talk about that, that's kind of the opposite of what the impression is with a factory job, that you're just a number, and that, you know, that certainly doesn't sound like that was the case with these retirement ceremonies.
Absolutely not. The people were certainly not numbers to me, and at the time I knew a lot of them by name. Unfortunately, I'd associate their name with more where they work in the plant. Sometimes when they would catch me on the outside, I'd recognize the face, but I'd have trouble coming up with the name. We had, everybody's an individual. Everybody's got their own life outside of Chrysler. And learning about people and what they did, and getting insights into what their hobbies were and what their likes were. And I became friends with lots of people at the plant. After I retired, Denny Davis called, but he said we kept wanting to go out west. So ended up, Denny Davis and Mark Hayworth and I, and a fellow named Herman Gross, who surprisingly just passed away a month ago or so. The 4 of us just one Sunday morning. Herman retired on Friday, and the four of us took off Monday morning and rode out to the West
Oh,
Coast.
my goodness. Huh.
You know, sadly, I've worked with way more management people than I'd like to admit that would say, you don't want to hang around with people like that. You don't really want to mess around with hourly people. The hourly people, my best friends in this community. I did lots of things outside of work with hourly people. I didn't have any problem with hourly people. I mean, that's one of the reasons I worked in manufacturing, because I fell in love with the hourly people. I mean, there's a lot of great, they were the heart and soul of Chrysler. Without them, there wouldn't be a Chrysler. And getting people to work together and motivated to do things and have common goals, you can build on success that you could never dreamed of. And that's all I ever tried to do, you know, and great opportunity. As I say, I'm blessed to have worked with lots of neat people.
In the years that you've worked at Chrysler, there's probably been an evolution in terms of women working at the plant.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
To be honest with you, when I first went into manufacturing was at Trenton Engine Plant, and there was already quite a few women on the floor. And when I went to other plants like Kokomo and here, there was women pretty much were accepted as equals then, and they did pretty much the jobs, because the jobs were planted by let out by seniority, and people had more seniority than women. Sometimes women got stuck with some tough jobs. And we had some ladies that really stepped up to the plate and were able to do some amazing things. There were some of the women at Kokomo, I loved them. They were hard-working people. And they beat the death out of a lot of the guys out on the plant floor, I'll tell you. So I had no problem with women working on the plant floor. Now, women in management, that became another issue, because diversity became a major issue in the plant floor. And I'll be honest with you, I had to jump through hoops to promote or hire a white male, because they were pushing for minorities and females. And I had a real problem with that. Not to have anything against minorities and females. I said, all I want is the best person for the job. I really don't care what color they are or what gender they are. You want me to run the plant like it's my own, but then you tie my hands behind my back.
Right.
And if you don't let me put the best people available in those jobs, then we're not going to have the best performing plant that we can have. But there was a lot of work done to try to find women and minorities that would come to Newcastle and work at the plant from a management standpoint. But it was an ongoing battle. I mean, we fought hard. And, unfortunately, there was you could post for jobs once you got in the corporation. And since there was a large desire to get minorities and diversity candidates throughout the corporation, some people would get in the corporation, then they would play that game of posting for all these other jobs and get promoted on a rapid pace more than, quite frankly, I think some of them deserved. But that was one of the flaws of the system, you know. It is what it is. But I had no problem with women in the plant. They were some of the best workers we had.
Some of the best team leaders.
Absolutely.
Some of the best team leaders.
Absolutely.
You know, as you look back over the history of Chrysler and your own personal involvement there, obviously are people that it's their life. They spend decades working there. I was just curious, what's the oldest person that you knew who worked for Chrysler? Do you remember?
I'm not sure. I know we gave out 2 50-year pins while I was at Newcastle.
Is that right?
One of them to Bumblebee.
Wendell Bertram.
Wendell Bertram worked out in the Ford shop. And the other one worked in production control, I think, at one of the cribs. I can't remember his name right now.
Leo Moles.
Yep, very good, Gene. Leo Moles. 50 years in the corporation. I don't know of any, well, I do know of. We got engineering, Fred Shrimpton, he was a 50-year man, and he came back after he retired and worked another 15 or 20. I mean, the guy, he started in his teens. But the oldest guy probably be Fred Shrimpton up in engineering. He was an amazing individual that worked in engine design. So there's been some people that had a lot of years in Chrysler. In fact, I got a good friend now, Bruce Raymond, who retired, and now they got him back working like Fred Shrimpton did, working in engine design. I ran into him just a few weeks ago. Amazing individual. In fact, one of his claims to fame, he carved the first pistol grip shifter.
Is that right? Oh, wow.
He worked in the mechanical lab, and he carved the first, what became the pistol grip shifter. Still got the original one he carved at home. Neat people.
Building a 70 Challenger.
Yeah, they first came out in 1970. Challengers and B-bodies had it.
There's obviously a lot of hard work, a lot of complicated work that goes on in a parts-making plant like Chrysler was. What was safety like? And what kind of record did you guys?
Actually, at least the safety record in the years I was at the plant was quite good, and we bragged about it. That's just like one of your measurables. Safety is one, and recordable injuries are a black eye. And our safety record was very, very good.
And why was that? Because people were careful? They
Well,
knew
we
what they
had
were
some
doing,
people
or-
heavily involved in safety. We had safety guys, and we promoted it. It was always a battle to get people to wear hearing protection and eye protection, but that was just a war I had to fight. I always thought Canada had a better idea. In Canada, if you're caught not wearing it, it's the employee's fault. In America, if an employee's not caught not wearing the proper protection, it's the plant manager's fault.
Really?
Yes. So it was imperative to me to try to get people to wear proper hearing, because if OSHA came in, anybody, and reported it was a recordable. I mean, that was a major black eye. That was always a battle. But as far as actual injuries, the plant was extremely good, extremely good. I always, I remember once we had the safety, every plant had a safety guy, and we had a meeting of all the safety guys in the plant. They asked me to talk to them. And I told them I really appreciate their work, but it's kind of like anybody else. Sometimes they try to overdo things. I said, look, you gotta remember, this is not Disneyland. People need to come to work here with the mindset they're gonna be working in a manufacturing facility, and there are ways you can get hurt. And if you can make things so safe that you can't get hurt, but then you also can't work on them and you can't operate the equipment. So there's a fine line you gotta walk all the time. All I'm asking you to use is use common sense, do what's right for the employees, and do what's right so we can have a company that can compete against outside suppliers and foreign suppliers that may not have safety regulations like we do. So we want to keep our employees safe. We want to have an environment they can work in that's safe as possible that we can make it, but we also want to have it one that can run and make parts and do it efficiently so we can meet the needs of our customers and the corporation. So there's always a fine line there, and some people would get gung-ho and they would do things where you couldn't even get at the machine. And sometimes you would have to throw a little common sense in there and get things where we could run the machine and fix the machine.
Jim, if we could take that bicycle across from us, that old-time bicycle, and just ride into the past, and ride backwards to where you're a young man again and looking for work, would you, if you had to do it all over again, would you still work for Chrysler?
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. It's been real character building at times, and there's been adversities along the way, but I wouldn't give up any of them. I've been absolutely blessed to be part of this corporation. I've been blessed to work with a lot of really neat people in varied places, because in engineering and at various plants, I mean, I've worked at engine plants, transmission plant, suspension plant, which is what Newcastle primarily was. Ended up working a year at a glass plant. And there was good people everywhere. And I started to say I wouldn't change a thing. There's probably a few things in the benefit of hindsight you might adjust a little bit. But overall, it was the best decision I ever could have made. I have no regrets.
Now, I've heard stories over the years about people leaving high school back in the day, coming to Chrysler and going to work the next day.
Yep.
Tell us how in the years of experience that you've had, education requirements have changed, and training has changed also.
Well, over the years, I didn't always agree with the corporation on their edicts. Obviously, there's been a move afoot to try to get people with higher and higher education at every level. There was an agreement made when they started the engine plants up in Dundee, Michigan, that there would be nobody without at least an associate's degree in the entire plant. That's even working on any job. When I was at Newcastle, they were pushing to not have anybody in a supervisory level without a degree. And I can understand that to a certain degree, and I even supported that. But I said, you know, a lot of the people in the plant, they know the ins and outs of the plant. You get a young guy out of college and put him out as supervising hard-nosed people that have been working in the plant floor for 20, 30 years, they'll use them up. I mean, there needs a fine line. Ideally, you want both. Get supervision, get them, and give them an opportunity to have college-educated people on the plant floor, because they're the upward mobility people in the plant. They'll be able to move up down the road and get to higher positions. But if you don't have people that come up through the ranks, that know the ins and outs, and know all the issues and the games that people can play to be up in the supervisory position, those are some of the ones that are the most capable of running a good operation. Ideally, you want a mix. And I fought like Jerry Hall, who I brought from Kokomo, and made an area manager. He did not have a college degree. I went through hell with the corporation to make that happen. When I was at Trenton Engine Plant, I promoted 3 people at one shot that didn't have college degrees, and I was told for 6 months that that would never happen. But I endured, and I made it happen. And those are some of the best employees I've ever had, and they were some of the best people that Chrysler could have had in those positions. But there's a mix. It's been, it was a real battle. I understand diversity. I love to have a diversity of inputs. When resolving an issue, having people with varied backgrounds, you get different inputs, and you can often come up with the best solution. But sometimes I think the diversity kick program was carried to extremes where you were prevented from having the best people in the best positions. So there was a give and take, and that's just something you had to live with in a business.
I don't know if you've had a chance to drive by the old site where the Chrysler plant is now. There is just a little bit of the building left.
Yeah.
It's kind of a memorial tribute. Have you driven by there? And if you have, how does that affect you?
Well, I haven't been by in the last few months, but I've been by the plant. Every now and then I'll go over and drive by. That corner means a lot to me. My office was just kind of upstairs over to the left a little bit. Will Rubeck used to always say that's part of him that they saved, because that's where his office was, right in that corner. The part that was saved was basically his office, where the cornerstone was. But I have a lot of fond memories of the plant. That's the place I really wanted to retire from. I actually was there for 9 years, and that's a long time for a person at a production manager or a plant manager level to be in a plant. Usually they move them around. I used the Daimler experience to fight that. Daimler came and they had people come to visit us after we became one company, and I really had a really good rapport with a guy named Dieter Bogert, who ran a component plant, somewhat like ours, but he had been there 15 years. And I used that as ammunition to stay here when they wanted to take me out. I said, hey, Daimler, they have somebody that knows the business and runs the business, and they keep him in the plant. So when the time came that they wanted to move me out, I fought it, but I lost. And that was a real humbling experience. Someone called me down to the cafeteria, and I walked in down there, and they had representatives of the community, and they gave me a key to the city, the first ever, from what I understand, which was very humbling and brought a tear to my eye in a lot of ways. Because I was, the community and the plant became part of my life, a big part of my life, and I really wanted it to succeed. And it's still a pretty good hurt that the plant didn't survive long term, but life goes on.
Well, we sure appreciate your time. Any final thoughts, or
Well,
we've covered a lot of ground, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
well, one thing that I was going to mention that came to mind in our discussions when we got QS 9000 certified. I mean, we involved everybody in the plant, because it took writing up the description, every job description. And you talk about people involvement. Every operator throughout the plant was involved with people representing IE and people representing the QS 9000 group that we had put together, writing up the proper description for their job, and what controls they had to do, how they ran SPC, how they did everything with that job, loaded, unloaded, and that was that involved everybody. And when we got certified, we put on a show like nothing I have seen ever in the corporation. We had the high school band in the inside. We had the leaders of all the main businesses in the company. When the leaders of the company came down for that celebration, they had to run the gun. When they came down from my office, they were in my office, and when they came downstairs, they had to run the gauntlet of every major merchandise person or salesperson or business order in the company, thanking them for being here and for being part of Newcastle, for allowing us to get certified, go further. And it was really amazing, really amazing. It was some people may say it was a dog and pony show, but we really put on Newcastle's best front for those people. And that didn't hurt us one little bit. And when the people left, they were pretty much in awe of what we accomplished. And I was too. It was amazing. And it was a real bright spot. It was one of the brightest spots in my career.
Well, sir, thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
I appreciate it.
I worked there for a long time. When Jim came in and I first met him, I knew he was a cheerleader. And he could motivate people and get people to work together better than any plant manager I ever worked for. So it was definitely an asset to have Jim Robertson in our plant.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's pretty humbling. It was
Very
it
good.
was, I think,
Taking
a
a
blessing
list of
that
questions.
I came here.